Greetings, everyone. So I timed this out the other night, and I was actually over my 50 minutes. So I have to go through like every tip and trick in less than a minute. So we're going to get started. So let me introduce myself. I'm Russell Paul. I'm the Senior Technical Product Manager. I am focused exclusively on modeling geometry tools, texturing, and also I help out a little bit on geometry script, scriptable tools when I am requested to do so. But obviously my main focus is modeling, and I've been modeling for many, many years. And just want to give you guys as much of information and tips, and you can call them tips or tricks or something in between. But I just want to show you a whole bunch of fun stuff to make it more productive for you to do modeling. So let's see what's welcome. It's not going to be exactly 25 tips and exactly 25 tricks. It's going to be something in between. We're going to do Q&A as much as we possibly can, and I'm just going to jump right into it. And let's just jump into the demo because we got a lot to cover. Okay, so I'm assuming everybody here is familiar with where modeling mode is, but the first thing I want to do is go over a few of the default settings that I like to change and some extra stuff that is really, really helpful in a lot of cases. So I'm going to keep, there's the little gear icon down here. I'm going to click on this guy. I always turned off combined gizmo just because I'm used to, I came from MyLand where I wanted to use the QWER. That's always super helpful. The other thing that I like to do is turn on this mesh element selection. Mesh element selection was a workflow that came in a couple of releases ago. It's still somewhat in development, but it leans more towards the selection first workflow that people might be familiar with. And so we'll play with that quite a bit here and there. And then the other thing is I tend to change my new mesh settings to dynamic mesh as opposed to static mesh. And one of the reasons I like to do this is because this allows any new meshes or models that I create are dynamic meshes, and they're part of the level as opposed to always writing out new static mesh actors every single time. So you'll convert to static mesh when you need to sort of finish up everything at the end. But as you're kind of working and iterating through models, a lot of times I find it a lot easier to use dynamic meshes. There's some other things in here that are great to play with, but we'll go to those. The other thing that you may have noticed is when I turned on the mesh element selection, I got this little prompt over here that says to go out and come back in. So I'm going to do that, go out to selection and come back in to modeling. And now the one thing you'll notice is you have a new menu over here for select. So see, these are some of the tools that we have where it's a kind of a more common selection first, select some faces or some triangles, perform an action on it, and then move on tools that are there. So we're going to kind of go over a bunch of those in there. The last couple of things to not necessarily change, but to keep an eye on is down here at the lower left, there's the folder where your new assets go. And then the other thing, going to bring it up real quick just so you can see it. Adjusting some of the general asset settings are something to keep in mind, where the files are getting created, what the name of the folder is. Sometimes you may have noticed that when you make a new mesh in the modeling mode, it comes out with this long string of random numbers at the end. That was there really to prevent any conflict if you're working in a team and you're checking things in. But you can turn that off with this turn off the append random string if you so desire to do that kind of stuff. So super helpful to kind of keep those things in mind. All right. I wrote everything down in little text to try and remind myself of all the numbers that I have to go through for all this kind of stuff. All right, some of the other cool things that are in here, let's just kind of quickly create a mesh. Let's throw a sphere in here just so you can see it now. So all of these things are basically just different selections, whether that's edges, points, polygroups. The other thing that came in that is nice and new for 5.5, so I'm running 5.5 preview 1 just so you're curious, is these now have selection conversion. So if you have something selected, whether it's vertices, oh my god, I selected all of them. But if you select these and you change to something else like triangles, it's going to convert that selection. And then that's going to expose whatever modeling functionality you can do on that selection. So that can be super helpful. The other thing that you have in here is underneath this little pen icon, you have kind of your standard selection conversion, selection editing options. Typically, I try and map these to sort of the standard hotkeys that you might be used to if you want to go ahead and do any of those kinds of things. But they're super helpful for doing that kind of workflow. So that's kind of a good thing to have. So the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new mesh, but I'm going to create it as a static mesh, just so you can kind of see what the difference is. And then I am going to select something here, and you'll notice I want to point this out to you in case you're working at the imported assets, models that you've brought in from another package. Sometimes you might, if you jump in here, you'll see that this little icon is actually locked. And what that is that's sort of to prevent you from accidentally doing a marquee select or selecting some meshes somewhere in your scene, grabbing some faces and editing them without specifically saying, this is an asset that I want to edit. Now, we make the assumption if you have created the mesh directly in the tools, we're making an assumption you want to edit it, so it's going to be sort of unlocked by default. But if you have assets that are imported or coming in from other places, just something to keep in mind that this little guy can be on there. All right, that's all cool. So a couple other things in here. If you haven't noticed that there's a favorites, you can just right-click on anything, say add it to favorites, so you can create your little palette of your favorite tools so you can have quick access to it. The other thing that you can do is the tools can have presets. So if you say create box and I wanted to change some assets of this box to say, be whatever I want it to be, you can actually come here and say create presets. You can create a new preset. So for people that maybe are doing like UEFN type of work or something like that, and they want to have all their architectural standards for walls and floors and ceilings, you could set specific sizes, resolutions, or other aspects of any of your meshes, or presets that you can then have just to quickly access things. This can be really helpful for a lot of things. What else do I have in here? All right, snapping. Snapping is one of those things you got to use it all the time. It's under the control key, just so you know. So if I have an axis and I've selected an axis, if I hold down the control key, you get this little guy here. It'll snap to a point or a face. So that, and it's constrained to that particular axis when you're doing that kind of stuff. The control snapping is in most of the tools, or I think actually all of the tools. So just keep in mind when you're trying stuff out and you need to snap, you can hit the axis, hold down the control key, and snap as much as you want. All right. God, so many things to go through. Okay, the other thing that most people don't play with it, or I haven't seen it at least on the forums a lot, but there's some of these tools actually have some secondary primitives in them. Like for instance, disk actually has punctured disk, which can be helpful if you want to actually create like Saturn rings around your hat, I guess on my sphere, whatever that is. Rectangle, I use actually rounded rectangle quite a bit. There is bevel, but if you wanted to, for instance, actually have a mesh with rounded corners, and you have control over what the corner radius is, what the number of slices are. Sometimes these are helpful just to have around, just for doing other types of work that you want to do. All right, let's get rid of that kind of thing. I'm not watching time, so if we go over, you guys are going to be late for the party. Sorry, no, that's not my fault. Okay. The next thing we need to do is we need to talk about polygroups. Polygroups is one of probably the most important workflows that we have, and God, I already made a mess. But so understanding how to set your polygroups in your primitives and also kind of what they can do is something that's super useful. So in most of the primitive tools, a lot of the times the polygroup method, it defaults to per face. I tend to switch it to per quad. And so what that means is, and I already have my cylinders here all set, so if I was to select polygroups and I grab this object, when it's on per face, what that's doing is that means that entire outside shape is one polygroup, which means that I can't really do a lot of polygroup editing with it because it's just sort of taking all those triangles and doing it. As opposed to if I had set it to per quad, you'll notice that each facet of that element is an individual polygroup. So it makes it easier for me to do like loop insert or just modeling in general. And it kind of gives you an abstraction of the triangle mesh that's more consistent with what you might have in just regular box modeling. So it's really kind of useful to keep that in mind when you're making your polygroups on your primitives to set that. You can change it afterwards, and I'll show you how to do that afterwards, or not change it, but you can kind of fake it afterwards if you need to. But that's a good thing to keep in mind when you're setting up your primitives and dropping them into your space. Okay, so now we get into the fun stuff. All right, so there is some really obviously there's lots of modeling tools in here, but I'm going to show you basically what happens and what the difference is in some of these modeling tools. And so insert loop is a really common tool that we use all the time for kind of basic modeling and fleshing out geometry. Our insert loop is it works on four-sided polygroups essentially. Now a polygroup that we kind of consider it to be a quad in our use case in a lot of times, but it actually has a lot more powerful. The polygroup can be anything. It could be any number of triangles, and it can be any number of sides. And but when it's four-sided, we can do things like loop insert with it. But since it can be any number of triangles in any shape, and you can see that I have this loop insert, and I'm able to actually drop in edges to it. But you notice these aren't flat little square triangles. These are, there's lots of different, that's a pretty dense mesh in there, right? Because what it's doing is it's actually doing a plane cut in between these edges. And that works great when you have a shape like this. But if, for instance, if I actually have a more, let's just take this cube here, and I discovered this last night. So let's see which is, I'm going to make it sort of a not perfect square. So there we go. All right, so if I do an insert loop on this guy, and I'm going to turn on just the wireframe display, so you see what's happening in the triangulation of that guy, which is it's doing a plane cut. So I'm getting kind of lots of different triangles in there. But as I stack this up, my plane cut is cutting through that, and I'm not ending up with a very nice triangulation on it. So instead of doing that, when you want to kind of do this sort of box modeling technique, what you can do is turn on insert and say retriangulate. So that means what it's going to do is every time it does an insert, it's retriangulating that section so that I have, pretty much almost all the time nice, 2 triangles per polygroup to sort of maintain your a nice topology. It kind of helps out later on, and it can make it so it's a lot easier, especially when you start doing other modeling operations on top of that. Let's accept that and say that's awesome because it's a cube with inserted edges on it. Okay. A couple other tools. I actually have a goal. We are going to model something other than just a sphere and a cylinder, so bear with me. So a couple other tools that are actually super helpful in loop insert that I use all the time. One of them is, by default, we kind of default to proportional offset. I use distance offset quite a bit. And then what I will do is actually turn off interactive. And so what I can do here is you can actually specify, how far away you want anything to be. So if you want it to be, say, 20 units, you can drop in 20 units. Now, of course, I want to say 20 from the bottom. That doesn't work. So you can actually say flip the offset direction. So I can say 20 there. And then you can say, I'm going to say 5 just as a fun thing. So it's easy to go ahead and use this distance offset. And sometimes I'll use this for building architectural elements where you're like, I need a wall or a door with an inset of a specific value. Being able to just say, I built up my wall of, 512 centimeters or whatever it is, or however you want it to be, and then use the distance offset to go in and actually kind of make sure that those things are set up in the correct way. It's pretty helpful for doing those types of things. And so I use that quite a bit when I'm trying to make elements and trying to keep that cleanliness and organization from the get-go so that I don't have to spend nearly as much time later on trying to snap things to other places, which is going to be helpful. That being said, one thing the next thing on the list is, how am I doing on time? Oh my God, 15 minutes in and already did 15 things. I'm perfect. It's all downhill after that. I took too much credit too fast. Okay, so now Extrude is probably everybody's favorite tool. And there's lots of different ways to use Extrude. And we actually have kind of a couple of different extrudes, because doing different things, you want to have different paths to do it. So Extrude here in the mesh element selection. So if I was to grab some faces here, and I'll just pick a couple, grab those guys right there. The Extrude here has some nice tools, some options in it. So I can say Extrude. Let's give a fixed distance. So it's just kind of extruding at 20, let's say 30. You can change the number of subdivisions. You can do all sorts of stuff to it. You can, flatten it at the very end so that it's just flat to plane. And there's all sorts of different options in here. And so this is the one Extrude. But funny enough, this Extrude is missing one option that actually shows up in the original Extrude. So I think we'll get these merged into one tool someday. But this is also a good opportunity to show you that when you select elements in the mesh element selection workflow, you get this Polygroup edit option. So if you're familiar with Polygroup edit, that's sort of our original tool for doing all your Polygroup editing structure. But if you have some faces selected and I click on Polygroup edit, I'm actually going to get a version of the Polygroup edit tool that's specific to this selection. So it's not the full Polygroup edit tool, but it's all the tools that are associated with that my Polygroup selection. If I had some edges selected and I clicked on Polygroup edit, I'll get the tools that are specific to the edge selection. So it's a fast way to access it without having to jump to another menu. It is missing some functionality, but it is a super fast way to say, oh, there's not a tool there that does it, but I can quickly access any of the other ones. So you have Extrude here, and this has the one where you can drag it out. See if people can see. Drag it out. But the other thing that it has, that's not what I wanted to do. Extrude. Let's do a fixed distance. Did I just? There we go. Extrude, fixed distance. This is a workflow that I use all the time, which is changing the direction mode. So like right now, it's just basically a single direction, but you can say, normal, single, selected triangle normals, selected triangles, normal, even. This is helpful, for instance, if you're having a corner, you have a shape and you want all the faces to extrude along the normals of those faces, you have the option to do that functionality in here. So another area where it's super helpful to do, switch to the other extrude option and accept that kind of thing. You can always hit enter for accept too if you forget to do that, which I do all the time. Okay, extrude options, we got through that. Okay, numerical input. Numerical input's always super important for a lot of things. And it pops up all the time over here, but there's a couple of different things that you can do with numerical input that you can do. So let's go ahead. I'm going to switch to border selection. A polygroup edge is, we refer to it as a border, and a polygroup corner is, or end point is considered a corner versus a triangle vertice or a triangle edge. So if you hear me using those terms, sometimes I forget and I use them interchangeably, but that's kind of what the difference is. So gonna just marquee select over that edge. So we selected that edge right here. And then you can just go ahead and, if I want to just move it, I could turn on snapping if I wanted to, but in this particular case, I'm gonna click on the delta mode, which is super helpful because I can just type in a very specific value of, like, say, negative 5. So I knew that, remember earlier I inserted my edges 5 units apart right here. And so when I extruded it out, I knew that that's about what that distance is. So if I move it 5, I'm going to get that 45-degree angle right there. So it's kind of a nice way to do stuff. But I find that using the delta offset can be really helpful for basically kind of maintaining some precision or just doing that offset. And then it will, you can hit reset if you wanted to, so you can keep on doing it. Or you could turn it off, and then you'll get the absolute position of that particular version in there. So what we got here, we got kind of a cylinder. It's got some things coming out of it, which we're going to use to, eventually we're going to make a handle, because, I guess this is Seattle, and somewhere in my head I thought I should make like a coffee mug. So we're going to work our way through making a coffee mug here, see how that goes. So, all right. So I've extruded these guys down just a little bit, just to kind of start off some things like that. The other thing that if you haven't done it is I use the numerical input all the time for doing, for flattening things. So, you can come here and I can, extrude those things down, but, and use the actual interactive scale icon. Or what I can do is I can just go into here and type in 0, not that 0. That's not good. No! It wouldn't be a demo if I didn't screw something up at some point. Ah, okay. See? But this is okay. We'll do this. So I can't not show you how to do that. It's like the best thing in the world. Okay. So grab these guys. Grab these faces. Okay, let's go ahead and we'll say extrude. Why is this, that's kind of interesting there, isn't it? Whoa. Delete. There is no history, so we don't have to worry about that one. All right. Let's try this one more time. And if not, then I have to move in. Okay, here we go. Move on. All right. So let's go ahead and say accept that. I have that shape. Those guys are still selected. And then let's go there. All right. So we have those frozen down. So now the one thing that I have is I still have those individual faces in between. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete those faces. And now the problem obviously that we have is, there's a gap in there, which, we don't want to have. So the one thing we want to do in this particular case is I'm going to go ahead and grab these, the entire mesh itself, and I'm going to just use the Weld tool. Now the Weld tool is going to look at the entire mesh. You can use the individual Weld tool if you want to just weld individual edges together, but in this particular case, I'm just going to weld the entire thing, and we'll just say accept. And so now if I go in here and I just grab one of these groups here and try and move it around, everything's connected, which is kind of what we want. But the one thing is that we now have this line of edges here in the middle, and because what we want to do is we want to make sort of a nice little angled of our coffee mug here. So let's just show you what that means. So I'm going to grab these guys. Let's move them there. I'm going to turn off snap. Why is that on? All right. So we have these guys right here. We don't like that. We want to get rid of those guys. You can actually just use the regular edge selection. And I'm going to grab those guys. You can hit the delete key. The delete, when you delete a border of a polygroup, is actually just merging those two polygroups together into one polygroup. But you'll notice the one thing is that this polygroup now, it kind of has this weird kink in it in the middle. So we want to straighten that out because we want to have it sort of nice and clean. So I'm going to grab all of those guys like this right here. And let's go ahead and I'm going to go back to this Polygroup edit tool because it's going to go at really, really quick. And I have my edge edits ability right here. I'm going to say straighten, and that's going to straighten out those edges. So one's just straight line right there. Now, but one thing that happens in the background when you do that, I'm going to switch to wireframe so you can see, is I still have those multiple triangles in between. So what you can do in this particular case is, let's go ahead and grab all these guys. Let's say, go back to Polygroup Edit. And there is a tool in here for, it should be, where is it? Simplify by group under Shape Edit. And if I click on that, what that's going to do is that's going to retriangulate those selected polygroups into the two triangles, because all four edges are nice and straight. So now I have a nice clean section in between. So it's nice clean topology for my model right there. God, I skipped a whole bunch of steps. Jeez. Mesh, weld. I did that one. Weld the edges, delete the borders, straighten things out, simplify by group, Bevel. Everybody's favorite tool in the world, Bevel, right? So we introduced Bevel quite a little while ago, but just recently we added the functionality to actually have rounded corners in the modeling mode. So we're going to go ahead and play with that a little bit and see what we can come up with to make this little coffee mug something more interesting. So once again, selecting those edges in between. If I was to go ahead and say Bevel, not very interesting. Let's make it a little bit thicker. Let's say, you know, 10. Give it some nice subdivisions. Let's do 10 sections in between. So, and then that seems good. Let's go ahead and do the rest of that. Say Bevel, instead of 10, let's do 15. So just to make it consistent on both sides. And then we'll do the same thing for the bottom, just because we need to. And then, now you notice that I'm doing it in individual things. I could have done both insides at the same time, but I don't know. Some days it's easier to work in front of a crowd of 100 people than it is when in my hotel room and by myself. So we have these nice edges. Everything looks great. The one thing that you'll notice is these outside faces are not exactly ideal. Because we're the way that the bevel works on this individual shape. This happens in every package where sometimes the bevels, overlap over top of each other. In this particular case, I'm just going to actually go ahead and just delete these faces right here. And then if I select this edge, just so that easily can work, you can just go ahead and go back to Polygroup Edit, and there's a fill tool in here. There should be a fill hole, just to go ahead and get a nice clean edge in there. It's super helpful for doing that kind of stuff. I have fill hole here. If anybody's reading ahead, there's a method to my madness. After fill hole is insert edge. I'm gonna circle back to that a little bit later, but we'll see what it is. But the next thing in here is there is a tool for if you mesh. You notice that this face right here was generated as a bevel, but it's actually multiple sections. It was 10 sections, but it's only one polygroup face. And so what happens is that this happens quite a bit, and this is a super helpful tool for if you have imported geometry that's coming from other places. You can actually go to there's this attributes menu over here, and the attributes menu contains all the menus that have and tools for different attributes of your mesh. When that's normals, polygroups, tangents, obviously, and other things in here. But the one thing in here is there's this generate polygroups tool, and there's a helpful option here called find quads. And what that'll do is it does a really good job of actually finding any things that should be a quad, and generates an individual polygroup for it, so that you can do more modeling operations in sort of the traditional box modeling workflow. So I'm just going to say accept, and it's doing it only on that selection, which is kind of nice. And so I won't necessarily bore you with going through every single aspect. That's why I saved off all these different versions of this. But there's other things in here as well for different polygroup generations. But that's a super helpful one to use in those particular cases. All right, so we have our edges, we have our quads, we're doing well. Everything's moving along. I believe it or not, I come back to bevel because I like it so much. I come back to it twice. Okay, so we got that. We found the quads. Got these guys are all in here. It's looking good. Let's see. We filled the holes. I'm going to go back to insert edge. Well, maybe I'll show you insert edge here. Okay. So insert edge is another super helpful tool. So when we filled this section right here, I have all my nice quads inside of here, and I have my nice sort of quad polygroups on the outside of here, but my shape in between is just one giant polygroup. So you can actually use the insert edge tool to do, to fix that up if you want to. If you really want it to be I don't want to say, I'll say precise or clean. I'm not going to use any other term. But there's a tool in here called Insert Edge. And what Insert Edge allows you to do is allows you to, it's might be hard to see, but it gives you this little green icon, and you can kind of just snap, it'll snap in between, between these guys. And so if you wanted to go ahead and make this nice, clean topology, it's really helpful for doing that kind of stuff. And you'll notice that what it's doing is as I'm going through and I'm inserting, I'm getting a little bit of nice retriangulation. So if I insert another edge, you know, between here and here. So it's super helpful for cleaning things up if you really want to maintain clean topology for your modeling operations. In this particular case, it's not going to do too much because we're going to go in and re-bevel this whole thing, and then that's going to make it even, you know, more crazy in the end. So, but we'll go ahead and do that later. All right, so we got our model, we got our handle started out. One of the things that shows up on believe it or not, I read the Discord forums all the time, but and I do reply if those of you are on there, you know, hi. But for some reason, actually making like a cup is something that comes up a lot on the forums, and I've seen numerous times where people say, "Oh, just do a Boolean operation," and yeah, you can do that. The problem with doing the Boolean is it doesn't actually create sort of a nice editable topology, you know, around the edges as nicely. So I recommend, you know, going in here and using some of the other regular tools. So I'm gonna, if I grab this top face and I say, once again, Polygroup edit, or actually you don't even have to do Polygroup. It's actually in the tools up in here. It's inset right here. You can, but it, you know, you get this nice little dragger. You can scale it in. But the reason I say to use inset or offset or one of the other extrusion-based tools is because it's now I'm getting this these nice groups and triangulation around this outside upper edge. So if I need to do anything with it, it's easy to do that. You can't. There's another tool in here called push pull, which is super helpful depending on your topology, because this, if I use like push pull, if I wanted to, I could actually push this section like all the way through the outside, and it'll Boolean out another shape around the other side. That's a super cool, useful tool for some things. But in this particular case, you know, I'm just going to use that inset and push that one down. And then once it's in there, I'm going to do another little bit of an inset, just so I'm starting to flush out my coffee mug that we have right here. So inset, super useful, super helpful. Use the other tools in there as much as you want. I highly recommend them just because they create a little bit of a nicer topology. I'm behind schedule. 26 minutes left, and you know, okay. Bevel 2. Don't worry, we're all good. Okay. So I say bevel part 2 because I want to show you some other things. I do find that bevel sometimes is useful to do in multiple steps. Sometimes, even though you might want to use the same edge, the same radius on an edge, sometimes I find it helpful to do it, you know, do it once, then do the next one, as opposed to trying to do the whole thing, you know, in one go. So let's go take this guy. I'm actually going to use the model polygroup edit tool here as opposed to the element selection. And one of the reasons that I want to do that is because there is the option to turn on edge loop selection. Eventually, I think we want to make edge loop selection more of a double click, but we haven't gotten there just yet. But you can turn on the edge loop selection so that if you were to go ahead and grab this upper edge, you can just grab that, you know, and you can grab this inner one here, and then you can say bevel, and it's going to do the entire thing. This giant light makes me, I can't really see anything. But anyway, let's turn that down to, say, 1.5. We don't need 10 sections. Maybe we only need, you know, 3. You know, let's accept that. We have that guy in there, and then we can come in here and we can grab these guys here. And if I want to, let me do the other side just to pretend to finish up the entire asset. Let's go ahead and we'll bevel this guy like that. Same deal. You know, maybe we want to go ahead and grab this bottom one here. Let's do another big, sort of wider bevel. Let's say 8. I don't know. No, 10. 10. So, all right. Cool. So, starting to kind of get things together. The one thing you'll notice, this is why I didn't spend too much time cleaning up stuff in here in the end, is you'll notice that the two bevels overlapped on top of each other in this little corner right here. It's sort of hard to see, but this is another place where I'm like, oh, well, maybe what I want to do in the end is just go ahead and get rid of these guys, and then I would just fill that hole in there just to make it nice and clean. It happens sometimes with bevel. You know, sometimes bevel's awesome, sometimes it causes your, you know, days of cleaning up stuff, but just quickly fill that and we're all good to go. All right, so we got our bevel, got that in there. Now, some of the other things that happens with all modeling all the time is our favorite thing in the world, pivot points. So there's the basic pivot point editing tool is in here. You can just basically say, you know, Xform, you can say edit pivot, and you get sort of your standard workflows of like, you know, top, bottom, center, left, right, whatever it is. But one of the things that's actually really nice about these mesh element selection tools, and this works in a lot of different places, and I'll show it to you in a couple of different locations, is if you have something selected, the tool itself will drop into that space. So for instance, if I actually grab, like, I'm just going to grab a random face. If I have this selected and I say edit pivot, it's actually going to put the pivot into the center of that selection. So, you know, so now I have my guys pivoted up there, right, which is not really where I want it. I probably want it down here. So if I click on that and I say edit pivot, it's going to basically set the pivot to that, the center of that selection. And there is also the ability to snap drag rotation, and if you needed to. In this particular case, if I wanted to drag this down and I hold down the control key, I'll snap it down to the very bottom because I had done a little bit of an inset up underneath there. But at least then I can have my pivot point at the bottom of the center of the cylinder of the coffee cup. So it's just another useful little tip to go in here and be able to set your pivot point to precisely the location that you want, so that, you know, if you need to later on, now I know that my pivot's at that particular location. So if I drop it down to, you know, right here, it's resting on the floor precisely. Got my bevel, got my set pivot. So I'm announcing something here that some people have been asking for years, mainly me, but a lot of other people have been having this as well. So, and we just, by the skin of our teeth, the team slipped in some of it for 5.5, which is, we have these sculpting tools. There's a vertex sculpting tool, and then there's a dynamic sculpting tool. Now, vertex sculpting is essentially it's only going to sculpt the whatever vertices or edges or triangles are in the mesh itself. So nothing really unusual in that. That's super helpful for if you want to maintain your topology. And I use this all the time. And there's a bunch of sculpting tools in here. You can use them however you want. In this particular case, I'm going to use dynamic sculpt. And what dynamic sculpt is going to do is it's going to retriangulate the mesh based off of the size of the original triangles and also the size of my the sculpting sphere that I have. And you can adjust. There's this relative triangle size is actually kind of the tool that you want to use. I'm going to change this from move. I'm going to change it to sculpt normal. And let's make it a little bigger. And I'm going to use a tablet with pressure sensitivity. For those of you familiar with Unreal, this is big news. So it's something that has been in the editor for a long time, but has been broken. So but now actually the guys have rewritten the tablet plugin, and so we just now have, you know, pressure sensitivity on our sculpt brushes. It's going to expand into other places as well, but this is, I cannot emphasize how excited I am for getting this into the editor. The Wacom people were super excited as well, so thanks them for sending us a bunch of tablets and harassing us for years. But anyway, it's super helpful for sculpting. You'll notice that it's sort of retriangulating in here. If I was to make a really, really small kind of brush and turn my triangulation size down, and see how it's hard to tell. I'll make it a little bit smaller. Make this even smaller. You know, I'm able to go ahead and sort of, this is not a very appetizing looking foam cappuccino. But you get the idea that you can actually use this brush to go ahead and resculpt or to resample, and it's super helpful for doing that kind of stuff inside of there. I'm just going to say accept. Thank you, Tablet. Thank you, Michael, for writing that, and Lonnie for putting it in. All right, we got our latte. It's almost done. We got some sculpted foam going on. What else do we need to do? All right, we need to do some UVs. Everybody's favorite thing in the world, UVs. All right, so everybody buckle up. It's going to be an hour of UV. So anyway, the cool thing about the UVs is the same thing that we were looking at earlier, which is if you have something that's a selection that you want to have. So let's just go ahead and grab those edges here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say expand my selection just one spot like this. And now here's something where you can basically say, oh, okay, I'm going to take and go to UVs, and I'm going to say project UVs, and it's going to project the UVs on only that selected area that I have right there. So it's another way to be, okay, I only want to work on one specific spot. Let me go ahead and do that kind of stuff. So let's go ahead and do that selection. Because we're going to go to the UV editor here in a second. Same thing here. Let's expand this guy out. You know, I should have set my hotkeys, which I didn't. Sorry, folks. You gotta watch me do this 5 times. So let's expand this up just a little bit more. You know, all right. So you can do those. Once again, I could say project UVs. I'm just gonna do a planar. Just we'll do something cool with it later. So we got that. And so those are already selected. And then let's go ahead and select these guys here. Actually, let's see. We got this selected, got that selected. I messed up my selection order. But what you can do here is, oh, that's what I was doing. I did it backwards. But if you were to go ahead and grab a bunch of this guy right here like this, let's do instead of doing a planar, you can say, change this to cylindrical, so we can, you know, get our wrap like that, which is actually kind of cool. So let's say use that as a starting point. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the UV editor. And there's a couple of new things that are really helpful in the UV editor. So let's bring up our mesh. Let's grab this guy. I'm going to you can either right click on it and say UV editor, or from the menu over here, you can actually just go to UV editor. And there's a couple of really cool things that you can do in the UV editor that I find to be super helpful if you guys are, you know, take as much joy in editing UVs as I do, which is there is this seam edit tool, which if I can, it's so hard to see up there. The seam edit tool I find to be super helpful because you can see it's kind of showing up these green edges right here. But what you can do is, if you needed to, if I wanted to, you can say, let's say so instead of split, as an, not that I'm going to do it, but it's going to find the shortest path. So basically, as I drag out, it's going to highlight whatever that path is, so you can kind of click around if you needed to help yourself when you're laying out things. You can kind of easily click. You don't have to click every single edge. You don't have to click every single face. You can sort of just quickly click around and then find the shortest path, and then hit, you know, whether you don't want to sew it or split it, you can do that. And then you can select. There's all your different selection modes up here. Select island, or you can select, you know, individual faces. You can. There's all the unwrap tools up in here. The couple of new things that are in here for 5.5 is, or actually 5.4 was the texel density. So you can, if you needed to, if you wanted to make sure that all of your islands are set to a proper texel density, you can select that and say, you know, apply your texel density to your specific islands, so you can make sure that everything is set, you know, the same. The other thing that is new for 5.5 is that there's some new layout options for maintaining scale and rotation as you're repacking your meshes. And then the big thing that has been asked for, again, numerous times, seems really simple, is UV snapshots. So now if you needed to, you can come in and you can, you know, just do your basic UV snapshot. And this is available in your baking tools as well as in here. But this is going to be super helpful. So if you need to write out like a UV map with with your layers or your snapshots, you can actually bring it into our texture graph tool, or you can export it out for use in other places. That's super helpful. People have been asking for it, and you know, we've finally been able to squeeze it in the schedule. The last thing in here that to keep in mind when you're in the UV editor is that there is a channels tool, so that if you need to add channels, remove channels for your UVs, duplicate stuff, you can't. Those things are in here. There's a bunch of other stuff in the UV editor. I'm not going to go through every single one of those. I got 13 minutes left. So we'll have to model the food. We haven't gotten anywhere. Oh my God. All right. Okay. Hurry, Russell, hurry. Okay. Don't save any of that. All right. So we got that stuff. So does anybody in here use SVG files? Raise your hands. Yes? Okay, 2. Okay. So in the yeah, so in the new motion design tool, in order to handle sort of motion graphics and things like that, they actually wrote an SVG importer, which seems like it wouldn't be necessarily useful, but one of the cool things that the SVG importer does is, and I just had brought this in, just the Unreal logo, is it just brings in an SVG file, extrudes it, or leaves it flat, converts it to a mesh that you can then use it for other things. So if you have logos or other things like that, it's actually just a really helpful way to do it. It's a plugin. You just turn on SVG import, you load an SVG file, drag it into your scene, and then you have some controls over it. And so I actually just did this one here, and I'm just going to go ahead and let's say just use that, and we're going to need to actually make sort of a logo on the side of our cup here. So the one thing to keep in mind is that when it brings it in, it ends up in this kind of really sort of, I would say, not great, mesh topology. Certainly not great if I want to deform it, right? If I want to deform it, I got these big flat triangles, these long triangles up here. Not really the best thing to do. So what I end up doing is I end up using the remesh tool, which is super helpful for doing a lot of things. Let's go up here, and if you said like remesh, you have all these options for different remeshing techniques. But what the remesh, so once you head and remesh it, then this is actually way easier to use if I want to deform it along my mug in this particular case. So I'm not going to bother doing it. I already did it. The other thing that you can do in here, actually, I am gonna do it because I want to show you something else. So let's just remesh that. And then the other thing I want to do in here is I'm going to use a deformer. There's a couple of different deformers in here that you can use. In this particular case, I want to show you use a lattice, just so that you can see what to do. And one thing to keep in mind when you're using your lattices is to change your interpolation type to cubic. If you do it as linear, and I grab some of these points and move them, it kind of makes this really sharp angle, which isn't really pretty. But if you change this to cubic, you're going to get a nice little soft fall off. So if you want to keep on, go ahead and, bending this around something, however you want to do it. But you notice now that I remeshed it, I'm getting a nice curvature that I can use. So if I want to drop it on my cup, my mug, that's all good. All right. So you did that. I preemptively did it like the cooking shows. It's here for you already. Now, the one thing that we want to do is I actually just want to use this as a, let's say I want to bake a normal or bake something else or use it as an application and not actually have to maintain this geometry. I'm going to click on my mug here, and then I'm going to say click on that guy. I'm going to say click on my logo. I'm going to go to my bake tools. I'm going to say bake textures. And I'm going to say, let's say bake tangent normal. I get this error here. It says the target mesh does not have valid tangents. Okay, because I made it in the editor and I did all this modeling work to it, the tangents aren't great. So you're going to grab this guy here and and there just happens to be a tangents tool right here. I'm going to say recalculate my tangents using fastMcT and say accept. So that now if I grab this guy and this guy right here, now if I say bake textures, because I have 2 meshes in there. That's why. There we go. So you have the baking tools have all sorts of functionality. I'm not going to go over every single one because there's like every single map in here that you could possibly want, whether it's curvature, ambient occlusion. You can bake textures, you can bake your vertex colors, you can do all these kinds of things there. Explore the baking tools. They're actually, I shouldn't say actually, they're really good. They're really useful. They're in the editor. You can bake your stuff. You can keep it all in the editor, so you don't have to go other places for doing certain things. But they're super helpful for doing a lot of stuff. But you can come in here and just do a basic baking. You can set your sample size 16. Ooh, it's gonna, okay. Change it to world. You can hide the projection source, so you can preview it as a material. Let's see, preview in world space. Hide the source. That's a little bit much, so let's just say 0.5. But in any case, so and then this is just going to write out a map that you can then just plug it into a material and use it to, for other stuff. All right. Almost there. Okay, my coffee mug is almost done in 36 steps. So another thing that happens all the time, people ask about all the time, is materials and editing materials. In the attributes tool, there is a edit materials tool, and you can do all sorts of things in here. And you can change, the best thing in here is changing your selection technique. It defaults to brush. In this particular case, I'm going to say select by UV island, because I remember we kind of UV'd it earlier. But if I say, I can go in here and I can select by UV island, so now I have these UVs right here. Right now it only has one active material. Let's say what we want to have is a couple materials. Let's make this material, whatever it is, dark shiny metal. The whole thing's kind of this dark shiny metal. But let's go ahead and say we're going to add another material slot in there, and then I'm going to change my active material to none, which is that second one right there. And let's just drop it there. And so now if I click on my assign active material, now I'm basically going to go ahead, and now I have two material slots on this mesh. So I have my metal on the inside and my dark metal on the outside. It's very faceted, it's not very good. So again, just go to normals. Let's just go ahead and tweak that stuff. I'll say face normal threshold, and we'll say accept. So now we're going ahead and we have, nice little soft rounded mesh in here, two different materials for the stainless steel interior that doesn't flake off and get you sick, and then the black outside. And we'll go from there. All right, 44, Jesus, go contrast, okay. So another tool that is super useful that I use actually quite a bit, I love splines. I came from a spline world. There is a draw spline tool, and I actually use it quite a bit sometimes just for laying out and kind of giving myself a guideline for modeling. And you can do different things with it. If you want to just drop in, a spline tool, you can do stuff like that. You can take that spline and just mesh that spline, if you wanted to get like a shape in there. That's all cool. If you wanted to do that, I'm actually going to take, again, I preemptively drew a nice little spline like this guy right here. And you can use that, and I'm going to say just revolve the spline so that if I wanted to do it, weird angle. Anyway, let's just change that to 90, not 900. So if you wanted to just do your traditional kind of revolving of splines, making of shapes, you can go ahead and do that kind of stuff. You can edit the spline if you wanted to. You can change the number of sections. Let's say instead of it being, we want to say explicit steps, let's just say 64, so it matches the 64 that I did for my mug. Kind of cool, easy way to do it. It's going to make my saucer plate for my food from later. All right, click. Where are we up here? 4D4. Okay, next thing we need to do is other cool tool is the pattern tool. I don't know if anybody has played with the pattern tool. It's super helpful. I'm gonna get rid of this guy, I don't need it anymore. The pattern tool allows you to basically go in and do all sorts of different patterns with jitter or rotation or scaling. I'm just gonna quickly come in here and just go underneath, where is, if I remember where it is, pattern tool. There's a bunch of different options in here for doing things. Right now it's just set to line. You can do grids, you can do, circles. You can add sort of all sorts of jitter to it. Let's just say we're going to do it along a Z. You can, let's say, not have it be at the center. Let's change it, make my little stack of plates that I want to have in my background on my scene. So, you know, because we're making a cafe, we're 1/10 of the way there. And so, you know, pattern tools, another super helpful, useful tool for doing different things. The one thing I didn't say is inside the pattern tool, there's a couple of different types of outputs that you can have. One of them is to separate the actors so that if you wanted to actually be able to use and manipulate any one of the duplicates later on. The other thing that you can do is you can do like an instant static mesh component if you wanted to have ISMs. And then the thing about that is there actually is an editing of an ISM as well, so that if you were to create a pattern with the pattern tool, then you could actually select individual instances in that pattern and swap those out for other meshes as well. Now, getting a little ahead of myself, if we get into that one, but there's some cool workflows inside of that. All right, we got our plates, we got our pattern. The next thing we need to have is, let's get rid of the, I don't need it, is I just want to quickly tell you about baking transforms. It's another one of those workflows and things that happens all the time. You do a non-proportional scale, you do a rotation, bake transform is in here. There's a couple different options for bake transform, whether it's bake rotation, bake scale, whether or not you want to recenter the pivot when you do the bake, if you've done something like that. And there's also a apply to all LODs. I have a couple of things about LODs, but it is helpful if you have multiple LODs to do the baking to all the different ones throughout the mesh that you have. 46, cool, okay. 47, so I was a hard surface modeler, so anybody here who's familiar with modeling like bread, forgive me. It's really hard to model a croissant. But in any case, so it gets better. It gets better. It's only the starting point. I'm not that bad. Anyway, the one thing that I did want to show is, so I just took a cylinder, I kind of just munched it up a little bit and did a sort of a starting version of kind of the rolls of a croissant. But one of the things that happens is that I want to use a Catmull-Clark subdivision, and our Catmull-Clark subdivision kind of relies on four-sided polygroups in order to subdivide. And so my end cap here is obviously a bunch of different triangles. And so one of the things that I have used periodically, and I use it's a super helpful way to do it, is in the Polygroup edit tool, there's this a decompose. And what decompose is going to do is it's going to basically kind of make a polygroup for every one of those the triangles that are in that. And then what you can do is, after I have that, I'm going to just go to my edge selection, and if I select every other see if I can actually get it. If I select every other one, I missed one, sorry. If I select every other edge, now basically each one of these, I have a four-sided polygroup around all those edges, so that way the Catmull-Clark subdivision can do a clean subdivide. Decompose is super useful, and then mixing that with like just deleting an edge or merging edges is a really quick way to manage the your topology in those particular cases. Okay, so now, okay, so I spent some time, so I got my guy, I inserted some edge loops in here, I just fenced it, you know, like classic old school, you know, fencing. I went in there, and now you can go in here and you can say, oh my God, not deform. Anyway, model, you can say subdivide, and in subdivide, there's a Catmull-Clark option. There are other options if your model is not strictly sort of four-sided polygroups. You can use other subdivision techniques. And the other thing that's in here that is kind of cool is there is an option to say new polygroups. And the new polygroups would be, so if you model something pretty rough, you can do a Catmull-Clark level 1, create new polygroups, and now you have a higher resolution, you know, sort of four-sided mesh polygroup that you can continue modeling from. In this particular case, I'm just going to say that's okay. So now we have sort of a nice, really clean mesh. And then because, you know, kind of an oven, I actually did spend some time. I sculpted it out a little bit. A little bit nicer, a little bit closer to a croissant, maybe. Don't judge. But one of the things I want to show you about something like this is one of the cool things that we've been really looking at recently, or I've been learning about more, is LOD control. And one of the so anyway, what you can do with this is there's a couple of things. One is there's a simplify tool in the modeling mode in Mesh, and if you say simplify, there's different ways that you can simplify things. There's percentage, there's doing different things. But one of the options in here is to do, not that one, is to actually keep existing positions. And what that's going to do is that means that some of these points are going to be the same as existing points in the mesh. And the reason that I want to do that is I'm going to just say, if we want to do that to 50% or maybe 25%, let's say 20% or something like that. So now we have a mesh that's a simplified version of the mesh, has points that are coinciding with each other in there. And then what we can actually use this as a starting point for our UV layout, and then we can transfer that UV layout back to our high-res mesh based off of our low-res. So this is, let me see if I can, so if we have our mesh, let me go ahead, and I already talked about that one. We have our simplified UV version here. So let's look at the UV editor on this guy, and it should be, so this is a sort of a lower res version of our model. You can see that it's fairly low res. I have my UV layout that I've done on this. I just did a quick seam down the center and across the outsides to lay that out. And now what we can do is from this guy right here, so our simplified version to our, and then this is my high-res sculpted version. So I can actually go from my high-res version to my sculpted version. And in the UVs tools, I can say transfer UVs. And that's going to transfer my UVs from this one to my new one. I'll say accept. And now if everything worked just real well, we should have, it's going to find the shortest path between the points that existed between the two. So now I actually have the UV layout from my high res that's basically built off of the my simplified version of it. Just so if you want to do something like that, it's actually really helpful to kind of do that as well. All right, now another tool that actually is really cool is down here at the lower left, there's this existing LOD tool, and this gives you a list of things to work on. But if you have a mesh, and so in this particular case, we still have our croissant. I have my dynamic mesh version of this guy right here. I'm going to say Xform. I'm going to say duplicate this mesh. But when I say duplicate the mesh, instead of making another dynamic version of it, I'm going to say change my output type to a static mesh, and I'm going to name it, yay. So sorry. Anyway, and let's just hide the input. We'll say accept. So now I have a new version over here. And what I did for these guys is these are 3 different resolutions that I simplified between those different versions. So you can kind of see that, I go from my high-res version to my different low-res versions. But let's just go ahead and grab this guy right here, select this guy, and underneath Xform, I'm going to say transfer. But when I say transfer, I'm going to say my target mesh, instead of it being LOD 1, I'm going to say make a new LOD, or LOD 0, make a new LOD 1, say accept, and then let's just do that again. Let's say transfer. Let's make, instead of a LOD 1, let's make a LOD 2. Okay, and now let's do it one more time. Say, go over here and say transfer, and let's say LOD 3, right? So now what happens is that now this mesh right here has these 3 simplified versions as LODs that are added to that mesh that easy. Now what's also cool is over here, right? If I wanted to, I can say right now it's at max available, but if I said LOD 3, and now if I launch any of the modeling tools, so if I go in here and I say model and I say like Polygroup edit, it's actually launching and opening up the editing tool with that selected LOD, so you can go ahead and edit any of the LODs that are in there directly. So it was a super helpful way to do stuff inside of that. All right, so that's that. We got that. Whoa, am I 5 minutes over or 5? Geez. Okay, that was actually what I had listed as 52 through 53. I can't believe we actually made it. So the last thing I was going to show you guys, just for fun, is I actually put all of them together into a cheesy my little still life scene, where I can have my little foamy thing right up in here, and my little croissant on my thing, And there's one last tool that I find to be super useful that people ask all the time, which is underneath the Xform, there is a transform tool up here that is super useful. It basically allows you to create one gizmo so that you can move all of your different individual things all together. And you could has a shared gizmo, or you can do multi-gizmo for every individual ones. But that's the last little tool I have in there. Made my croissant, made my plate, my foamy mocha, and it did all of that in 66 minutes. Thank you everybody for the time, and you know, please keep on using the tools.